There's no paper? Hello. Hi. Oh, yeah. I'm sorry? Oh, okay. So it is time for our panel to start. If we have any of our other panelists in the audience, I would love for them to come up. Yeah, I tried. I could shush everyone, do some proper library stuff. Oh, I do, if you can hear my voice, clap once, and then they get softer and softer. Yeah, that's a good one. Hello.
You at a panel earlier today.
Yeah.
I wanted to give you a copy of a book I have
Oh.
in advance for your copy. If you haven't seen it, I had some extras from the publisher, so it's uncorrected proof. So it's
Awesome. No.
But
This looks great.
I thought you might
Yes, thank you. I'll take a look at it.
Yeah. So.
Nice to meet you. All right, so we are already a couple minutes into panel start time, so we are going to take our places, everyone. Welcome to Interactive and In Person. Thank you all for joining us. I am your moderator today, Moni Barrette. I'm a longtime public librarian, and I am a current Eisner judge and the just recently passed president of the Graphic Novel and Comics Roundtable. But more importantly, we have our panelists who are going to introduce themselves in just a minute. I'm very excited to be working with all of them. So let's go ahead and just go down the line. Dan, do you want to tell the audience who you are and what you do?
Hi, my name is Dan Santat. I'm a children's book author illustrator, best known for The Adventures of Beagle, the Unimaginary Friend, which won the Caldecott Medal in 2015. I'm here to talk about, I believe I'm here to talk about my memoir, First Time for Everything, which is the true story about when I was 13, traveling for 3 weeks in Europe and trying to discover who I am as a person.
Oh, that sounds excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you. And Mark?
Hello, my name is Dan Santat. My name is Mark Fearing.
Duo
and
Dans.
I draw and write things.
I'm Mac Barnett, and I write kids' books, picture books, novels, and a graphic novel series, the first one of which is The First Cat in Space Ate Pizza.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Case. I'm a graphic novelist. I've done, 8 or 9 books for like Disney, DC, Dark Horse Comics. This one's from Holiday House. It's my latest one. It's called Little Monarchs. It's a middle grade YA kind of a book, and it's up for the Eisner Award tonight.
Yay!
Sure. Oh, no, there it goes. Hi, I'm Nidhi Chanani. I'm an illustrator and a graphic novelist. My debut graphic novel was Pashmina, and since then I've made a lot of other books like Jukebox, Shark Princess, which is an early reader series, and I'm here promoting my upcoming title, Super Boba Cafe, which is out in October. So.
Excellent. Yay. So we're excited to have everyone here, and we're going to be talking about in-person interactive programming. My hope is for those of you who have worked in libraries or maybe teachers to come away with some either new ideas that you've never tried before or leveling up what you have been doing with programming using creative folks in your educational spaces. And I know that a lot of you probably even did those things during the pandemic, and a lot of it was virtual, but now we can kind of do it in person. Are all of you guys available, like if we contacted your publishers, are all of you available to potentially do something in person if it's local or, okay, good. That's the first thing we need to know, right, is, make sure that if you are someone who's interested in having a program like that, that you're not afraid to reach out and ask, because you'd be surprised at how willing the creators are, how willing the publishers are to do things like that. So, I want to ask each of you what your actual previous experience is in doing this type of programming, whether it was in person or whether it was virtual.
I was a little slow to the school visit kind of game. I really like to focus on the work, and I think it started percolating and picking up maybe a couple years before the pandemic. And the point that I realized that I really missed the kids was doing Zoom conferences. It was the worst, right? Especially in the beginning when they turned off the camera on their end. And like it was muted, and you were just talking to a black screen, and you'd crack jokes, and you'd say, "I hope someone on the other side is alive and having fun." And I do remember there was this one moment when I was doing a presentation, and everyone used different formats, and one of them was what's it called? Google Meetup or Google, yeah. And one of the things that I remember about that is that the mute button is dependent on the person on the other side. They had to mute it on their end. And I remember one day I had to do a presentation. All the kids are at home, and there was something that I really loved about seeing everybody's cameras in their bedrooms. And before you're starting up, you would just say, "Hey, I like your bunk bed. You get to sleep on the top." And all the kids just felt like they were involved. And I remember this one time, I just asked this rhetorical question of like, "How's everybody doing today?" And then suddenly you just hear, "Good, good, I'm good too, I'm good, we're all good." And then the principal had to say like, "No, everybody, we have to mute." Oh. And then it just got out of control because everyone's like, "I need you to understand that I am good too." And then something happened where I just realized, you know what, like this thing just kind of came off the rails, and that's perfectly fine. And I just switched to my drawing pad, and I said, "Everybody grab a piece of paper and a pen, we're gonna learn how to draw." And just like that, like magic, like suddenly in seconds, the whole room just went quiet. And you just hear this voice say, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I'm drawing a square, but let's see where we go from there." And it really is that involvement with the kids and interaction and having them feel like they're participating, which is everything. And so over time, we all got used to figured out how Zoom worked, but it's a distant second to actually being in person.
Yeah, I've been doing school visits, library visits for quite a few years. I think I won't do virtual visits, so I'm not interested in doing them. But I also have done some visits to the Oregon Youth Authority and spent days out on the Oregon coast. I live in Portland. And that's a very different type of visit, but probably the most interesting and meaningful that I've had. Scary at first, but a lot of different types of experiences like that in person is superior. Yeah, there's no doubt. And I think especially with younger ones, I just don't think it's an effective way to do what I do, at least.
Yeah, I love telling stories out loud to kids. The first stories I ever wrote were written on the fly when I was a camp counselor at a summer camp. And all my jobs, my in-person jobs, have always been with kids. I was a substitute teacher. I ran a nonprofit in Los Angeles that taught writing to kids called 826LA. And I think when I am writing, it's a very solitary job. It's you alone in a room sort of wrestling with your own brain. And for me, I just rely on that muscle I developed telling stories out loud, playing with attention when it slackens, when it tightens. I just imagine sitting in front of a group of kids telling them a story. And so when the book is done and you actually get to go out and share it, that to me is the biggest thrill. That's the part I love.
Yeah, I've done a lot of different types of things. I've taught workshops and cartooning and drawing stuff for kids in libraries and schools, and I also do some virtual visits. But yeah, to echo what everybody else is saying, the personal connections with kids are great, and they're powerful sometimes too. I've done stuff in rural communities where, there's not a lot of access to the arts, and you can just see there's some kids who are just not only so excited to have you there because it's their thing, cartooning is their thing, or it's something they want to develop, but you're like an ally to them. You're like literally like a superhero. So I had this one girl come up to me, and it was clear that she had kind of a difficult situation at home. I couldn't get into the details of it, but at the end of the workshop, she was teary because she wasn't really happy with the work that she'd done, but I was able to connect with her, and she softened and just kind of came alive again. And I think that's the power of art for so many kids, and it's a shame that many of our public schools and our systems don't support it more. So if you can either get, access to grant funding to help bring people in, or maybe you have a budget to do it anyway. There's often resources to help get authors to visit your place as well.
Yeah, I've done a mix of all of it, virtual, in-person, library stuff. I was just on tour for my early reader graphic novel series, Shark Princess, so I was out with the second book, Shark Party. And one of the things that I like to do is when you're on book tour, the visits are free. And so I like to intentionally go to Title I schools so that you are there with a community of kids who may never get an author visit because they can't afford it. And the reality is that the book buys aren't there. But it doesn't really matter to me. I think it's far more important to be in that community of people who are struggling. Often their parents have like 3 jobs, and they just don't have those extra funds for a book. But it's important to stand there as who I am and say, like, this is a potential future for you, So I think that's really important. And I think that it's a vital thing that we can provide, and it might be something that schools and libraries don't know, that if somebody's on tour and they reach out, that it's free, so.
Awesome, thanks you guys. So I usually actually lead at the top with this, and it's okay if some of you don't have them, but the fastest way to ingratiate yourself to like library supporters and library workers is to tell us your most fond library story, whether it was like, or maybe a terrible one, and make us laugh about how the old gatekeepers are gone. But either way, tell us your favorite library story.
I'll pass. I have to think about that real quickly. If I just want to work down the line.
Librarians, I go to the coast of Oregon for several years, which actually are the most schools in highest level of poverty. most levels of homeless students are in the Oregon coast. And there's a librarian out there. She is since retired, which is a huge loss. Unbelievable loss for the schools out there. I mean, after they took her library away and turned it into classrooms, by the way, because they didn't have enough space. A lot of the schools are K-8 schools up there. I adored her, and she did so much to bring things into that school and to get kids, access to things. We all think the internet, everyone can look up everything, kids know about everything. It's not true. And there's a lot more questions, and my presentations are not just about drawing or making books. It's about looking at possible careers across, all kinds of spectrums. And I really appreciated that she worked so hard, and it was in Warrington and a lot of those coastal cities, to get me out there. And I ate lunch with kids. She had different groups. She had a lot of activities beyond just stand up and talk about your book, which is the least interesting thing I can imagine doing. And that type of a librarian blows me away. She's retired. Big loss.
I grew up in a town called Castro Valley up in the Bay Area, and our library when I was growing up was an old building from the maybe late 40s, early 50s, like beautiful mid-century building, but like just, it's a library. By the 80s, it had been through a lot. Eames chairs before they were cool, carpet from the 40s or the 50s. It was incredible. It was my favorite place to go. My mom and I would go every week. And I discovered in a corner a shelf of the Hardy Boys books. And I got obsessed. It was my mission to read every single Hardy Boys book, which was pretty easy when I started because it wasn't the most popular shelf. So I started my mission, but then a few books in, the book I needed, like book 6, was gone. I was like, what is this? Nobody's ever touching these things. And this kept happening to me, that like the book I would need to read would be checked out. It wouldn't be coming back. I'd have to put it on hold. I was like learning this whole system of holds and waiting, and I wanted to read them in order, and it was so maddening, so frustrating. Many years later, I found out that actually the illustrator of the first Cat in Space Ate Pizza, Sean Harris, he grew up in the same town as me, Castro Valley, right down the street, also was obsessed with the Hardy Boys books. And he was so mad at me, and I was so mad at him. We didn't even know each other. Before we even met, we were already so mad at each other. And we still get mad at each other a lot, but that's a big part of our friendship. Yeah.
The first idea that came to mind was last year I went to ALA in DC to promote this book, and I brought my she was 10 at the time, my 10-year-old with me, and it's a lot of hours sitting behind the booth with Dad, and but she was making her own little things like bookmarks with watercolors and all that kind of stuff. And at some point, a very generous and sweet librarian that we had struck up kind of one of those mini convention friendships with offered to take her out on the floor and like go around and find all the books for her. And because she was a librarian, I was like, that's probably an okay thing to do. Virtual stranger, okay, you can take my 10-year-old kid and roam this giant convention hall. And Dorothy was just elated. And Dorothy is a very particular kid. She's a little bit neurodivergent, and so it was good knowing that she was in solid care with somebody who is probably used to kids like that. I don't know. Librarians are the best.
So, I grew up like a lot of people who end up loving the library. I mean, I think everybody loves the library for different reasons, but I feel that this is common amongst a lot of people that I've talked to, is that home wasn't a safe place, and the library was. So I was there a lot, and I loved escaping into books, and they meant so much to me, but mostly it was that space where I could just like walk in, and the librarian knew that I was gonna be there for a while, and they knew what books I liked, and they helped me select them. So as a young person, I spent every lunch in middle school and high school, in the library, and I got to know the librarians, and they got to know me, and I didn't necessarily want to talk about anything that was going on, but they knew what books to give me to help me get through. So
I remembered a story. So I was in 3rd grade. I went to elementary school in Ventura County in Camarillo, California. And one of my biggest passions early on since kindergarten was I loved to draw, but my parents never let me take art classes because they never wanted to detract me from the true vision of someday becoming a doctor. And so it was one of these things where I was just passionate about drawing, and I was drawing every day, but my parents said no. Like even the kindergarten teacher said, your son, he has this ability to draw. You might want to consider giving him some art lessons. And they said, no, he's going to be a doctor someday. And I remember going into our school library, and I remember a librarian, Mrs. Whitley. She pulled me aside one day, because it was one of those ones where the classroom would get to have a library day one day of the week. And I remember going in there, and Mrs. Whitley was just waiting by the door. She was so excited. And she said, Mr. Santat, I have something to show you. And she takes out this book, and it was How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way, which is still in publication, fantastic book. And she said, now, Mr. Santat, I know your parents won't let you take art classes, but that doesn't mean you can't check out books to teach yourself how to draw. And she said, I think you're going to like this book. And I checked out the book, and it was one of these things where you just open it up and you're thinking, like, I can't even draw a stick figure. And it, lo and behold, starts with stick figures. And then, adding muscles and costumes and facial expressions. And I fell in love with that book, and I checked it out week after week, to the point where when I eventually graduated from, grade school in 6th grade, she had given me the book. She said, Mr. Santat, we need to get a new copy because you totally wore out this cover. It's ripped off. And to this day, I still have that copy of How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way on my shelf, and my kids will occasionally pull it off. And it's like the most precious book that I ever got. And honestly, like, I don't think I'd be here today if it wasn't for that moment with Mrs. Whitley. And it's like the best experience I ever had in a library.
I love that. That's the kind of rebel, renegade librarianship we need in the world. So thank you guys for sharing. So I wanted to ask, what type of activities have been your favorite to do when you've gone either virtually or in person, whether it's like live drawing or whether it's like teaching writing or having them do it after you, and also define that success by like the impact that it made as far as like creativity and kind of bringing your stories to life.
In terms of drawing exercises, I do like to show kids that it's not really so much a challenge I want kids to understand that anybody can draw, and it doesn't have to be perfect. I think that's the biggest thing that I want them to get across. Because what I notice, and especially growing up and being around kids growing up and, seeing it now, there's a certain age where I think kids just kind of decide, you know what, I'm just not good at drawing. And that emerges somewhere around 2nd or 3rd grade. They just go, you know what, I'm not good at drawing, I don't want to do it anymore. Also, there is this nature in schools where if budgets are cut, arts are always the first things to go. So I'm always encouraging the arts. And, in my school visits, like, I always devote like the last 20 minutes of the presentation on just how to draw things basically inspired by a device that you'll most notably see in advertising known as symbology. And you'll draw a picture, a symbol of a cloud, right? And then I ask the kids, I say, does that look like a cloud in the sky? And they say, no. And it's like, because this is a symbol of a cloud. Like, Egyptians used hieroglyphics. That's how they communicated. Anybody here can draw this cloud, but if we combine that simple with something else, you can turn it into something else. And you draw the cloud, and then you draw a rectangle underneath it, and then suddenly it's a tree. Or you change that rectangle to a triangle, and suddenly it's cotton candy. And you give the kids this ability to see that they're capable of doing something, and it doesn't have to be perfect, because I think there's this perception that if you draw something, it has to look exactly like Garfield. It has to exactly look like whatever it is they're trying to draw. And, I'll do another example where I will say, look, I haven't drawn Garfield in a while. Let me draw Garfield from memory. And it's just this janky, this really gross looking Garfield, but like the kids get it. Like there's basic components of a thing that you understand, like, oh, okay, this is kind of what Garfield looks like. I can get it because you have the black jaggedy stripes and the big bulbous eyes, and you'll go on and do other things and say, let's draw something like off the top of our heads. Let's draw Charlie Brown. Like, what are some iconic things about Charlie Brown? The zigzag shirt, the little squiggly thing on his head. He's bald. He's got these ears, and then you start integrating letters of the alphabet. Oh, the nose looks like a letter C. The ears look like a letter C, and things like that. And the end product might not look exactly like Charles Schultz's Charlie Brown, but they are proud of the fact that they can draw their version of Charlie Brown. And I say that to them. I say, this may not be the way Charles Schultz did it, but this is your Charlie Brown, and in terms of style, that's something you have to embrace and you have to treasure. So it really comes from trying to just bring up this confidence of kids saying, like, what they do is valid, because really that's kind of a thing we as professional artists is to try to find a style. And one of the hardest things about finding a style is kind of coming to this point of acceptance where you realize that what you do is valid. And, if a kid can figure that out at 5, then that's fantastic, and that's the thing I encourage.
I love that.
Yeah, I think reminding kids that every line, a lot of children, a lot of students will be worried that every line has to be perfect. And I think the biggest encouragement is just saying it can be messy, and the end product can be something that is unexpected to get there, and have fun doing it. I tend not to teach straight drawing classes. Most of the time, it's about ideas. I think there's a great experience. One student did not want to be in this, event at the library, and is a little antagonistic. And we started talking about what he wanted to draw, and he liked football a whole lot. He wanted to draw football, and I said, well, by the end, he's drawing football players and imaginary football players, and so I always try to stress drawing original things. I don't like to draw recognizable characters any more than I can. I won't draw my own characters. My push is always to get the kids, the students, thinking about creating something of their own, so they can stop looking for entertainment from all of this other stuff that's out there, and create and share. And there's real joy in that, and there's real growth in that. So anything to encourage that is great stories.
The centerpiece of my author visits always is a read aloud. That's my favorite part. But comics kind of present a unique challenge for a read aloud. Unlike a picture book or even a prose novel, they're not necessarily well suited for reading out loud to a big group of people. It's going to be hard to see the panels from the back. So for the first Cat in Space, what we did, I think the idea came actually from the origin of this book. Before it was a book, it was a live cartoon. And if you've never heard of live cartoons before, that's because Sean and I invented them. They grew out of a thing that I started right at the beginning of the pandemic. That first week in March of 2020 when schools were canceled, I just posted on Instagram, hey, tomorrow, Monday at noon, I'm just going to read a picture book out loud, and I'll read a picture book out loud every day until this is over. I was like, I've written like 30 picture books. We're good. And that became Mac's Book Club show, and it went on for years. But as we were going through that first week, coming up on Saturday, I was like, man, like, what are we going to do for Saturday? These kids just went through a week. They didn't leave the house. Like, all markers of what a week is are gone. So what is a weekend? And for me, Saturday always meant Saturday morning cartoons. So I called up Sean, and I was like, do you want to come on and we will do like a live cartoon? Like, you can just move your camera over some drawings and move the drawings, and we'll just do voices and put on a cartoon. And Sean, as he always does, was like, yeah, let's do this. So we made a thing called The First Cat in Space Ate Pizza. And the joke was, it was episode 1. It had this bombastic title. It was sort of a Bruckheimer 90s action movie combined with a 50s science fiction B movie about a cat that gets blasted into space to save the moon from being eaten by rats. and at no point does the cat eat pizza, and the episode just ends. And we did it, and it was the hardest thing I'd ever done. It was so intense, and then everybody was like, great, we can't wait for episode 2 next week. And we're like, that was not the plan, that's not the joke. And so we immediately got to work on episode 2, and we ended up making 12 episodes of this sprawling science fiction epic, and the paper engineering got more and more intense, and every Saturday, tens of thousands of kids from around the world would tune in to see what was happening in this story. And everything, music, there was a new song every week, sound effects, and the reading and the movement was all live. So Sean and I just did all the voices. Also, an editor from Harper was watching, and she said, would you guys be interested in making this a graphic novel? And we were. When it came time to present it live, we wanted to give some of that same theatrical experience that it was created for. So what we do is we have a video of just a camera moving over the panels of the book that we project behind us. And that video is scored, so it has a full musical score and has sound effects on the audio track too. And then we, with microphones, we read the dialogue live. We perform all the characters, and it's so much fun. It's very big and bombastic, and in a form which can be small and very intimate. I think we end up being able to have it both ways, and the readings have been such a thrill.
I heard it over the back of somebody else's booth at the Berkeley Book Festival last year. It was a lot of fun.
Oh, I'm glad.
And I could tell you had a great crowd, and it was a good response. So, I think my favorite thing is that with this book, I used drawing to take real places and sort of transform them in a fantastic way. And when you're dealing with kids who, some of them like to work out of imagination and some of them can only understand the world in terms of what's there, it's a fun exercise to be able to do a workshop with them where we get to take some elements from reality and some elements from imagination and see kind of what happens in that space. And so one of the ways that we do that sometimes is with this book, all the locations in it are marked with geo-coordinates and a compass heading, so you can follow the characters through these real places that are transformed with like post-apocalyptic stuff going on. And so we could draw their school, and we could draw the vines growing over it, and whatever classroom they hate, we could collapse that one. And maybe we'll put like the class clown. If you can identify the class clown in the group of kids that you're working with, if you draw a caricature of that kid, it brings down the house. It's super fun. Sometimes there's like a kid who will volunteer, like, draw me, and then all of his friends are just pointing and laughing as you make fun of him, and he's loving it too. So, yeah, I think I like what a couple of people said about, maybe it was Mark, about the way that you see the world. Drawing really starts in your head. It's kind of like you identify uniquely some aspect of the world, and you translate that onto paper, and it doesn't have to be perfect, but it is yours. Wherever you're starting from, that is your set of marks, and yeah.
So my presentation is structured in a way where I kind of tell a little bit about my path to becoming an artist and an author, because I think that it's so mysterious. I know when I was young, I was like, how do you get that job? Like, everybody that I know is a doctor or an engineer, and that seems like awfully boring. And this is where I find my joys in books, and like, how do you get that place? How do you get there? So I do that, and then the thing that always brings everybody together is when I draw. That's the live drawing, and a lot of what Dan said is very similar to what I do, but in virtual, I'll be in a position where they're in their classrooms and they can pass out sheets and they can draw along with me. When I'm doing a big auditorium, that's a lot more complicated, and so I have them give me suggestions, and so I break it down, and my style is simple. But even if you pick up my work, to somebody who can't draw that, I'm a professional artist, it doesn't seem easy. And so my goal is to draw like a cat or a shark or something and break down kind of the shapes. And then I add to it. Then we add a background. And they give me their ideas. And then I add a word balloon. And so we go from something that starts off with a simple letter C, right, that they can all do, and we see how that kind of transcends as you add more to it, but everything is simple and accessible. And so I can kind of communicate with them about how a very simple drawing with the right elements can become a story, and then you can take it to whatever place you want to go. And if they're drawing with me, I make sure to kind of reiterate, like what Dan said, is that your drawing is going to look different than mine. And that's exactly how it's supposed to be, because we are not the same people, and you're going to bring different things to your cat. Your cat might be fuzzy. Your cat might have a birthday hat on. Your cat might have a bow tie on. And give me a reason. Why is that? Like, what did you think when you put that in there? And so to kind of start that conversation of how that drawing translates into storytelling. So,
Thanks. And actually, if we want to work backwards and be ladies first this next time, let's talk about how the hosts, whether it's a library, school, can make you comfortable and make it a good physical and kind of emotional environment for your attendees to be in. Anything from tools they provide to how they set it up. Talk to us about that.
I mean, I think that the best is when they're prepared, that they know you're coming, that they're excited, that there are things around maybe the school or the library telling them who you are, having the books available. And then for the attendees, again, if you're going to draw along with the author, that those materials are easily accessible, and there's like a process to disseminate them. But yeah, that's actually most of it. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have too much more to add. I think my best experiences have been likewise when the teachers or the librarians were prepared to, kind of seed the information, or maybe even do a little workshop of their own in sort of a warm-up way before the artist gets there.
Like, one really small thing that makes a huge difference is an introduction to start. And it doesn't have to be long, and it doesn't have to be like full of hype. Truly can be as simple as, today we're going to hear from our author, Barnett. Because part of what kids are doing when they come to an author presentation is they're just learning how to be an audience, and you want to give them that experience of something starting, preparing, ending. And the difference between sort of walking onto a dead stage cold and having to explain why you're there, and just hearing like, let's welcome our author today, is so huge. So I always appreciate just, there are those times where you're just sort of standing in the back, and your host will be standing in a corner and just be looking at you and just be like, it's time, go on up. And that can be pretty brutal.
Yeah.
Nothing to add.
I think I'm a weird one in the sense that I feel like I'm in service to the librarian. I go there and I know how tough it is. Your job is, And I just want to say right now, I want to thank you for having to deal with all the parents. Like that's a whole other thing. But I feel like my job. I mean, I feel like I'm being invited into your home, and I'm your guest. And so, if I go there, there's certain expectations, and I want to meet those expectations. And so, if there's anything I can do to make your job easier, which is essentially to foster the love of reading, I'm going to do whatever I can. And it's not so much about. You'll go to these schools, and sometimes they can be very like, tell them about how important it is to read, and it's like, fuck no, I'm not gonna do that.
That's kind of the opposite of what you just said for the previous 45 seconds, though.
It's not, but I think I wanna create an environment that's not about, hey, let's read, but let's have fun in the exercise of reading so that you can appreciate reading on your own.
Yeah.
It's one thing to say, hey, you should read. you know, because it's important. It'll make you. I think there's so much, you know, there was like that whole thing around the Harry Potter era where everybody was like, you need to go from kindergarten to Harry Potter because that's the only way you're going to get to Harvard. And you're just like, no, I'm like, we're really stripping away the love of reading because you're now making it an assignment for some greater gain down the line, right? And so for me, like, you know, when I do a pretty silly show, like I do like little Photoshop things where like I'm making my head really huge and everything, and I'm just trying to take anything I can to just make it a fun place and just foster the love of reading in general, you know, and that can come by, you know, drawing silly things or reading a book in a silly way or, you know, or whatever. But really for me, you know, if it's about trying to make the librarian's job easier, then that's really my main focus, you know, because I know how hard it is for you guys to do that, especially with book censorship these days. And again, I can't reiterate enough, thank you so much for dealing with parents. Because it's so weird. I find it so bizarre that we're in an age now where one parent possesses so much power that they can strip one book away from an entire community. Like, you know, I mean, not to praise like us growing up, but there was a time where, you know, if a kid was out of line or something, you know, like you would entrust the teacher or the librarian to say, you know what, you're a little out of line. And now I kind of find it in a place where parents come to the school and they go, hey, what are you doing to my kid? And suddenly that teacher's the one that gets in trouble. And I'm just like, where did we go wrong, you know? So again, thank you for dealing with parents.
Thanks for addressing that. And I would love to like do a whole another hour-long panel about bans and challenges and how they've affected all of your work. But for today, I do want to leave time for audience questions. I would like to ask, what do you hope, what are some of your strategies for keeping them engaged? And you guys have kind of touched on this as far as their attention spans and everything. And also, what do you hope that your audiences will take away from their sessions with you?
Strategies, so it's interesting actually, because some people have said, oh, I have a picture book coming out, but I don't really want to go talk to the littles. They can't, you know, keep still. And I was like, well, it's just because your presentation needs to be really engaging. And so one of the strategies that I always use is like, they're not going to stay still, and they're not going to be quiet. So if I go in assuming that, well, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask them a lot of questions, and I'm going to do a lot of call and response. And that works really well. And of course the drawing, which is like just magic, and breaking it down. So yeah, just being accessible. You know, I think it's important to have the fun, but also to not be like the author in the room, you know, so.
It's fun to work with the same materials that the kids have so that you can make that connection. Like we can do really cool stuff with simple tools, just papers and pencils. But also, you know, some kids are going to come and they're just not going to want to draw. They're just not going to want to participate. So sometimes it's about, you know, breaking up the format of what you're doing so that you just have a little time to show them how you draw or show them like what you're good at, because that's kind of exciting for people to be able to say, hey, can you draw a unicorn? How would you draw a unicorn? You know, like the kids get to see their ideas come alive sort of with you as the art monkey for a few minutes. So that can be a good way to keep them and their attention on, yeah.
Yeah, I think it varies depending on the book, but always like the obligation is on us as the authors to really be deserving of kids' attention. For me, that's always like the desire to put on a show in some way. I think just standing up there and being the author, like you're saying, there's a self-importance there of asking kids to listen that I can't get on board with. I don't think that we're essentially deserving of kids' attention. I think we need to earn it and honor it. I think children's attention is like one of the most precious resources we have, because it's by definition finite. You're only a kid for so long. There are only so many presentations, so many books, so many things a kid is going to see in this important time in their life. And if I have 45 minutes of that time, I'm going to do whatever I can to really respect that and earn it and give them something good.
When I visit schools over the last few years, I've requested always to present to different age groups. I won't do full auditoriums of all grades. It's just not effective for the schools, the children, or myself. So I really want to look at that K1, that 2-3, that 4-5. I do a lot of middle school. I do high school visits where we talk about careers. So, by age, getting that content right is a big deal. And, I think the most effective way is to have that, if possible. But I won't do a visit now if it is a Lyceum type. We're going to put K through 6 in the auditorium. I did those. I think they're just not effective for anybody. My presentations are very improvisational. I do follow a track, but I've spent enough time in my strange life in front of audiences. I do like the engagement. I do want to talk to students. I do want to hear what they have questions about. I do not want to stand in front and read a poem that I want to find out what it is they're there for. And that means talking to them and being willing to flip through my iPad and do a totally different part of the presentation or an entirely different presentation, especially with that 5th, 6th grade where they're asking about animation or about something in particular. Let's go talk about that then. So those are the things that bring the most value to me and I think the audiences.
In terms of the value to the kids, I think after you've come and done a presentation and you tried to get the kids hyped up with the love of reading, I think for me personally, and I don't think I have to worry about anybody in this audience, but I think I would really appreciate most folks to not invalidate any particular kind of reading. So, if a kid likes to read a picture book, but they may be too old for it, let them read the book, if that's what they love to read. Because it can be a very slippery slope if you tell them you can't read that, or if you say that's not real reading. This is a debate that we've always had with graphic novels for years. Oh, you can't read that, that's not real reading, But they love to read it, and that's the thing that needs to be preserved. Because there was a point in my childhood where my parents, everything, they were very utility type of readers. So I never really found the joy of reading because my parents, they came from Thailand, and so they weren't familiar with any of the Western classics. And so I was never familiar with a lot of the titles that people were so, beholden to. And my parents' philosophy was, well, if you want to get better at math, read a math book. If you want to read, get better, I want you to be a doctor, read the science book. And I absolutely loathed reading from day one, right? And it wasn't until I had a friend who had a trunk full of comic books, and I just ingested, X-Men, Thor, and it was my soap opera. It was everything to me, and that was, I had to work backwards. I had to discover a love of reading because from day one I thought reading was the pits, right? And that's a slippery slope. And if they end up at a place where they don't like to read, it's going to be really hard to gain them back. So, if they read something and they like reading something, let them read it. And I think that's the best thing you can do, for all our sakes.
Love that. So they're going to be going out and doing signings. You're going to have a chance to interact with each of them outside right after this. But knowing that, does anyone have any questions? I feel like I just discouraged it by saying you're going to get to ask them in a minute anyway. But that's okay, because I want to give each of them a chance to tell us where we can find you, social media, websites, that kind of thing.
I am on all social media platforms at dsantat, and my website is dansantatbooks.com.
And Instagram, you can look for Mark Fearing. I think that's what it's under.
Yeah, I'm mostly on Instagram to the extent that I'm on anything, and that's just at MacBarnett. And macbarnett.com is my website.
And I'm jonathancase.net. I couldn't get the .com. Now it's $3,000. I don't care that much.
Yeah.
But you can find all my social links on there, and you can contact me through a form there.
I'm on a few social medias as Nidhi Art, or if that's hard to remember, my website is everydayloveart.com.
That's cool. So at this time, I want to go ahead and thank you, San Diego Public Library, San Diego Comic-Con, Children's Book Council, and our panelists primarily for being here. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Yeah, thanks, everybody.